Do I think that a clownish billionaire entertainer is going to end American democracy? No. If you're in a plane and there's turbulence, do you want your pilot saying, gosh, we're going to crash, we're going to crash, we're going to crash? Or do you want your pilot saying, we're going to get to the other side? So I think we're going to prevail, but I think that Donald Trump is going to do tremendous damage if he wins to the country in 4 years, and he's going to erode voting rights and make it harder to emerge as a multiracial democracy.
Hello and welcome to the Bulwark Podcast. I'm your host, Tim Miller. I'm delighted to be here with Democratic Congressman Khanna. His district is located in my old neck of the woods, Silicon Valley. Thanks for coming on the Bulwark Podcast, sir. I've been wanting to do this for a while.
Well, I've been wanting to come on for a while, so great to be on.
Great. Our initial plan here when we first started emailing was to have a broad, high-minded conversation about the state of the Democratic Party and populism, and hopefully we'll have some time for some of that, but the news gods have intervened, unfortunately. So we got to talk news first. I was wondering, I'd like to start with the president's interview with CNN last night. He said that if Israel invades the city of Rafah, the U.S. will stop supplying it with artillery shells, bombs for fighter jets, and other offensive weapons. You'd voted against aid for Israel, I think, on these same grounds. So why don't you talk about his announcement and what you think about what the president said last night on CNN?
Well, the president basically affirmed what 37 Democrats who voted no on offensive weapons to Netanyahu were saying. What we were saying is you can't keep arming Netanyahu with offensive weapons if he's going to Rafah and defy the United States, and where we continue to have massive civilian loss of life. So president's position now is consistent with the 37 Democrats who voted no, and I think it's a welcome shift.
Well, there are more Democrats that have voted yes. Richie Torres last night says America cannot claim that its commitment to Israel is ironclad, and then proceeded to withhold aid. Fetterman said it was deeply disappointing. They weren't alone. There were some others. What do you say to your colleagues who are arguing that this is sending the wrong signal to our ally that faced a devastating attack from Hamas and who still holds hostages?
Well, it was a devastating, atrocious terrorist attack that I unambiguously condemned. And then I said Israel had the right to get Hamas's perpetrators who committed October 7th. And Israel systematically degraded Hamas, but by the end of November, by Thanksgiving, they had degraded a lot of Hamas's military capability. The question now is, how are you going to get the hostages back? And how are you going to end the loss of life and have some security in that region? My view, and not just my view, but many of the Israeli hostages themselves and people protesting there, is that the best way to get the hostages back is to get a deal for a ceasefire. I think going into Rafah precludes that deal. I think it puts the hostage families at risk. And I also think that you're never going to be able to eliminate Hamas. They've got 20 to 30,000 fighters. You can degrade Hamas, but to have new governance there, you need a permanent ceasefire. And then the Saudis and UAE and Egypt and Israel working with the Palestinians on new governance. That, to me, is in Israel's long-term security. It may not be Netanyahu's vision, but I think it is the vision of probably more of the labor tradition in Israel.
Yeah, the pushback to that that I've seen from some on the right, people that I think are acting in good faith on this, like our friend David Frum, friend of the podcast, he'd argue that taking this leverage away from Israel, trying to put clamps on the different types of weaponry they can use, the different types of offensive actions they can use, actually doesn't limit the war, it prolongs it, was Frum's argument. That others have said that it makes it harder to get, less likely that the hostages will be released. It makes Hamas feel that they have, they've more resolve, they can survive for longer. What's your pushback to that? Like this idea that this is showing weakness and that it might actually prolong the war?
Well, we've tried the other way, and it's going on 7 months. I mean, we've given Netanyahu a blank check. The war hasn't ended. The hostages haven't come home. So obviously that way it hasn't worked. The crux of the disagreement, I don't think there's any moral equivalence. I mean, Hamas is a terrorist organization. I strongly disagree with Netanyahu, but Israel is a democratic country. There's no moral equivalence. What Hamas did was wrong on October 7th. But the crux of the disagreements and the negotiations is that Hamas wants a permanent end to the war. Netanyahu is saying, no, even if we get the hostages, we want to be able to go into Rafah. The language that was used was sustainable calm, trying to appease both sides. But the essence of the decision that we have to make is, will Netanyahu be willing to live with an end to the war, having destroyed a lot of Hamas's capability, if he gets the hostages back? I think that it makes sense in this context. And then to have a diplomatic effort to find new governance, recognizing that not everyone would have been brought to accountability, and it's a difficult decision. But that's really the issue. And philosophically, I think Netanyahu or the people on the right would say, no, that's not enough. We need to get the Hamas leadership out.
Yeah. You had a conversation at the University of Wisconsin with a broad array of students about the war. I want to play a little bit from that conversation and get your thoughts on the other side.
Gaza's not a huge place, but Hamas could have told all of its civilians
to go where?
To go to southern Gaza.
The worst massacre in all of Gaza in the 6 months was in Rafah, the safe place that they told her. Now they're saying they want to invade Rafah. Where should they go now? Back to the north where they're still bombing?
What to you is the uncrossed line?
It easily could have been my family or some of my best friends that were kidnapped from Israel. What would the line be for me to say, you guys can keep them? I have no idea.
Civilians are dying. At what point is it on Hamas to say, okay, we give up, have your hostages back, we'll dismantle?
You can't expect diplomacy from people living under the thumb of occupation. That's never their response.
Everybody's using Hamas as a kind of justification to do all that kind of stuff that's happened. But what happened before Hamas took over? How were those people treated?
I was aghast at this government before the war started. It's not one that represents my sense of Judaism, my sense of Zionism, meaning the state of Israel has a right to exist, that there should be a Palestinian state.
But does anyone want to weigh in on Biden's policies and the critiques?
The sooner there's a ceasefire, the more lives are being saved. So the fact that he's very against that is very tough to see.
I have Jewish friends that are left-leaning that have voted Democrat that will no longer vote for Joe Biden because, they feel betrayed. They feel like he doesn't represent their interests in the best way anymore.
I guess before we get into the specifics of what the kids were arguing, what was your impression of that conversation? It seems like you had a pretty wide-ranging ideological group there, and we hear that these conversations are getting shut down on campuses. So what was your experience?
I was quite inspired and impressed by the students. I mean, remember, there are 4,000 campuses and colleges in the United States. We hear about the stuff going on in Michigan and Columbia, but in many classrooms, I think there are more type of conversations like the ones I had. And if people look at the clip, it's not just students who are all supportive of Palestine. The Jewish American students there are very, very supportive of what the Israeli war cabinet is doing. They blame Hamas clearly for the conflict, but there is a respectful, passionate exchange of ideas. One of the Jewish students talks about losing a cousin on October 7th. She is moved when a Palestinian student says every day she calls her mother to find out how many more family members of hers died in Gaza. Now, do I think that there was some kumbaya moment and they have a future Middle East plan? No. But it's breaking down some of the barriers. It's figuring out how we talk to each other so that the conflicts in the Middle East aren't splitting us further in America.
Yeah, I thought it was really moving and enjoyed the whole audio. People can go find it. We'll put the full video in the show notes for people that wanted more. I guess one thing I've people have been critical of me on from the left in talking about these protests is, I come look, we're a bunch of never Trumpers, right? We come from the background of we were in a party where there was a group of people that we thought were the crazy ones that we were keeping down in the basement, that were making cruel, bigoted, dehumanizing arguments at times. We enabled that, I think, in a lot of ways. And I look back with that with regret that I didn't speak out about that. And so I feel like I come to this discussion of the campus protests with that baggage or that perspective, however you want to look at it. And I'm frustrated that I see people on the progressive left sometimes making the same mistake, right? Where there were students in that conversation who had just very strong disagreements with Israel's actions, but were making substantive arguments. But there are a lot of people on these campuses that are making arguments about how Intifada is justified, anti-Semitic arguments, eliminationist arguments. Do you think that, folks that have your point of view more progressive on this issue have like an obligation to do some self-policing on that?
Yes. In fact, I'm going to be giving a major speech. I'm getting a award at the Arab American Civil Rights League on May 16th, in Dearborn, Michigan, in front of 500 to 700 Muslim and Arab Americans. Wow. And one of the first lines in my speech is going to be, I would give the same remarks here as I would give at the ADL or the AJC. And I talk about how there should be zero tolerance and a strict rejection of any anti-Semitism or Islamophobia, but certainly chanting Zionists don't deserve to live, or globalize the Intifada, or this space is not open to Jews, has chilling reminiscence of anti-Semitism in European and American universities, and should be condemned. That doesn't mean that we can't recognize the broader sentiment of young people who are out there because they say too many people dying and they want an end to the war. And at their best, they represent the anti-Vietnam, anti-apartheid, anti-Iraq war protests. But one of the things I talk about is satyagraha, which my grandfather spent 4 years in jail alongside Gandhi's independence movement. And Gandhi in Satyagraha, which was about truth, force, and nonviolence, talks about having to speak out about your own side's bigotry first and loudly. And King did that, Lewis did that. So I think that the protesters lose a moral force when they aren't condemning obvious bigotry on their own side.
That's refreshing. I concur with that. What is going to be your message in Dearborn? You hear a lot. It's hard for me to kind of grasp how much of this is social media performance and how much of this is real. But there's a lot of buzz that Joe Biden's losing altitude, that there's folks in the Arab American community that are going to refuse to vote for him, despite the just a plain obvious fact that the person that proposed the Muslim ban would be a worse option for the country and for the Muslim community. What's your message to people? Well, how do you assess that threat? Does Joe Biden have a big threat in that community? And if so, how are you speaking to folks in that community about why they should come around and despite their reservations?
Well, there are two points. But the larger point of what I'm going to say is that we need a new political dialogue here, and that we do need protests to call out our own side so that we don't devolve into violent, toxic attacks on ethnicity. And I think we need to be doing that in places that are not comfortable. So I could easily give an anti-Semitism speech to the AJC, but raising some of those issues in Dearborn, I think, is going to have more impact, and vice versa on Islamophobia. On Biden himself, I say, look, the president is obviously moving. I mean, you may disagree with what he said last night. Others will agree, but it would be hard-pressed to think that the protests and the progressive left and the Muslim and Arab American community and people critical of his policies haven't had an impact. I mean, look at where he was 7 months ago. Look at where he is today. His language yesterday was echoed the exact statement the 37 Democrats who voted against the offensive aid put out. So I would say, look, with Biden, you at least have impact. Do you think Donald Trump would care at all about your sentiments on Gaza or civil rights in this country? Absolutely not. And we have to recognize the stakes and be pragmatic.
Yeah, is that true though? Like, do you think that Biden has moved because of pressure from the left? I'm not sure that that's true. I think that he's moved because of the facts on the ground in Israel and frankly around the world. He's been like one of the last world leaders to stick by Bibi unapologetically, and like you said, things have changed over the last 7 months. Like, isn't just the reality of the war what has driven his change more than trying to appeal to the political side? Or maybe not. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I don't think it's a crude calculation. I don't think he's saying, I need to appease some part of the base, but I think he has heard from lawmakers over and over again, from people in the Arab and Muslim American community, from young people, about the toll that is taking place in Gaza, about the loss of human life. I think he has been made aware that some of his rhetoric early on didn't have enough empathy for the loss of life of innocents in Gaza. And I think there has been a critique that he gave too much of a blank check to Netanyahu. Now, I'm not in his head. I can tell you that most politicians aren't immune from public sentiment, and I'm sure it's a combination of the facts on the ground, his conviction, and hearing from people in a democracy. Some people would say, well, is that craven? I said, no, that's what's supposed to happen in a democracy. You're supposed to listen to public sentiment as well. Abraham Lincoln said public sentiment is everything.
Yeah. One more thing on Biden on this. I don't know what the political calculation is. I kind of laugh when people are like, he's making political calculations on this. And the Biden coalition that he's going to need in November ranges from people that would be like pretty happy for Gaza to be completely leveled, like some folks in my world, some former neocon anti-Trump types, all the way to people that think that Israel is an apartheid state and would be happy to see the Israeli government dismantled, and everywhere in between, right? Like the Biden coalition on this issue could not be more divided, could not be more far apart. Like, what's he supposed to do? Like, how does he, think about this issue politically, do you think?
Yeah. First, if I could just clarify my position.
Okay, please. Please do.
I have two states, and I believe that Israel should
I was not meaning to lump you in with the dismantle the Israeli government part, but you have to admit there are going to be some of those people that have that view that vote for Joe Biden this year because he's a better option than Donald Trump.
Sure.
Yeah.
And, I agree with your characterization of the coalition that's going to be with Biden. I just want to put my stake is I'm sort of center left. I believe Israel has a right to exist as a Jewish democratic state. That is what Zionism means. Why shouldn't the Jewish people have one state if so many other people have the right to self-determination? But I am against the occupation in the West Bank and in Gaza, and believe there should be a Palestinian state and a two-state solution. Now, easier to say than to implement, but that's where Barak and the labor, Rabin and Perez's is where I am. I guess what I would say is that the biggest thing that the president needs to do, and I know this is hard, is to figure out how to end the war and free the hostages. You don't get graded on a curve. You're president of the United States. It's gone on 7 months. I think most people are saying, end it. If Burns can't do it, send someone who can. Send Clinton, send Obama, figure out how do we end the war. And I think for Biden, the political calculation is how do I get the hostages out and end the war? And I think that the challenge, and it's reflected in his approval ratings across the spectrum, is people are just unhappy because there's an ongoing war. People are seeing killing. And that's why being president of the United States is the toughest job in the world.
Yeah. One more kind of related issue on this, or maybe completely unrelated, but you voted against the TikTok ban.
I did.
I'm pretty for the TikTok. I was pretty for the TikTok ban. I don't think that we would let China own NBC, for example. So I'm not sure why we should let them own one of the biggest social media platforms in the country and the way they could. I care more about the algorithm than I do about the privacy side of things. But I was interested. I had somebody on the podcast a couple weeks ago that said that he thought that part of the motivation behind the TikTok ban was that a lot of folks in Congress were concerned about the anti-Israel sentiment, and that was a motivator. I sort of pushed back on that, thought that maybe that was a little conspiratorial. There's a lot of negative feedback from our listeners on this point. Then Mitt Romney last week, basically says this, in an interview. Mitt Romney basically.
I was shocked.
So what do you think about this? Yeah, I
put out a TikTok video on Mitt Romney's clip that went viral. I mean, it was shocking. I mean, Romney basically is like, yeah, we all voted against the ban or for the ban because people were talking too much about Palestinian issues. And I said, that's viewpoint censorship. That's exactly why I had First Amendment concerns. Look, if you wanted to have a law say the Chinese government should have zero role in algorithms in America, absolutely. Hold people criminally accountable at Oracle or TikTok for any interference from the Chinese government or any foreign government. If you want to have a law on data privacy, fine. If you wanted to stop TikTok from coming in through the CFIUS process before it became an app, fine. But you can't have this app with 170 million Americans and then have Romney say, well, we think too many Americans are saying things that are pro-Palestine, so now we're going to shut down the app. And young people feel like we finally have an app where we have a voice. The older generation is saying, go get active. Now we're active, and now they don't like what we're saying, so they're going to shut us down. That's very different than saying, don't go yell anti-Semitic obscenities at your classmates or block Jewish students from getting into the classroom. There should be consequences. Yeah. But come on, you're engaged in speech on TikTok?
Yeah. How do you think about the free speech issue? I'm directionally for speech, but I just always have to laugh at like the Elons, some of your pals over there. They're like, well, I'm just for unfettered free. Nobody's for unfettered free speech. Okay. Like anybody who's ever been on a message board online knows that you have to have moderation. If you don't have moderation, the message board is going to turn into porn and ad hominem and fake accounts, right? There has to be some kind of limiting principle, or else, look what happened to Craigslist, right? There's a reason nobody uses Craigslist anymore because everybody on there is a scammer, or and so you have to have some kind of limiting principle. What is it for you? Like, what is the limiting principle on free speech and on tech platforms?
Well, I think there are two different questions. One is, what is the limiting principle on the First Amendment, which is when can the government come in and stop the speech or take it down? That's a higher bar. That I think has to be the incitement to violence or illegal conduct. But then there's something below that, which is a moderation on a technology platform. And there I think you should have reasonable standards of not engaging in religious or bigotry or ethnic bigotry, not dehumanizing other people on the platform. And I think it's perfectly appropriate for tech companies, and they should have those standards to monitor conversation. If it was that easy, then we could just have unambiguous, unrestricted speech, and sort of the world would be better. We would never have needed a political philosophy. I mean, just everyone talks, everything will be better. No, I mean, we created town halls and institutions, and Congress may not be perfect because we have to think about how do you talk to each other and listen to each other and resolve difference. And I think there's a tech utopianism that has gone astray, where people just think they put up these platforms, let everyone talk, and somehow democracy will be better. And what we're seeing oftentimes, it's not, it's worse.
Do you see that in your personal relationships? I mean, if everybody in the Democratic House, at least by reputation, you talk to you're their representative. So you talk to Elon, you talk to some of these, tech titans. It does feel like there's been a radicalization over the past few years in this crowd in a way that's pretty alarming. I mean, there was a Puck reported that there's a meeting between Musk and Sachs and some of these other folks about supporting Trump. What underlies all this? I mean, it's kind of like these people have the most influence, the most wealth of any category of people in the history of the world. Like, what are they so angry about? Can you provide any insight into why we're seeing kind of the right wing folks in Silicon Valley kind of go down a radicalization pipeline, or am I overstating it? Do you think maybe?
Well, no. I think 95% are still very supportive of progressives and Democrats. And remember, I represent that district, and I co-chair Bernie Sanders' campaign, and I still get a lot of support. So it's not that it's all.
I'm talking about the handful of the.
But you're right. Yeah. But I will say that there are some of the most prominent voices. Yeah. Elon, Mark Andreessen, Dave Sachs, others who have gone more to the right. And the question then is why and how. Some of it has been a critique on foreign policy, where they think that America has been too involved overseas. I disagree with some of them on Ukraine, but
this is ridiculous. You can't alibi them on this. David Sachs was for the Iraq War, and this is not it. This is not, that can't be it. It must be something else.
Yeah, no, I'm telling you what they tell me. I'm not defending that. And certainly I don't agree with their view on Ukraine. I voted for the Ukraine aid. Some of it, I think, is the sense that they want to be contrarian. I mean, look, when you're a Silicon Valley entrepreneur, you get there by going against the grain and thinking about something that's totally different than what everyone else thinks, and that may work to be a great entrepreneur and startup. Probably doesn't work when you're talking about leading the world's greatest democracy. So some of it is a contrarianism, and some of it is this, they're concerned with what they call, quote unquote, identity politics, wokeness. They think that there has been a compromise of what they would define as excellence. The irony is that the Valley itself is filled with diversity. It's partly what's allowed, in my view, excellence. And I think that they have a misunderstanding of that. And if anything, we've been too exclusive as a Valley. We don't have enough women. We don't have African-American, Latino Americans. We need to do a better job. But there's, they are probably on the opposite side of me on the question of race and gender and some of those issues.
Yeah, I think you got around to it. I'm not giving them credit on the Ukraine thing. That's contrarianism coming in. I refuse to believe that's David Sachs's principled position. All right, so let's do. I was supposed to get to Marjorie. Let's end with Marjorie. We'll do Marjorie as a little dessert at the end. All right, so let's do some of our high-minded discussion that we wanted to get into. You have pushed for what you call economic patriotism, a new economic patriotism. You have kind of an agenda associated with that. I'm about halfway with you on the agenda. So why don't you explain what you mean? Yeah, why don't you explain what you mean, and then we can hash it out a little bit.
Well, look, the central story, I think, of this country has been that for 50 years, you've had wealth pile up in my district, in the hands of people like Elon Musk, in New York and Seattle, and we watched as town after town was hollowed out. We lost steel, we lost aluminum, we lost textiles, and no one really cared what was happening to places, unfortunately, like Youngstown, Ohio, or Johnstown, Pennsylvania. They were told, go move, go get another job, become a coder, and slowly the American dream started to slip away. And we've gone from 50th in income inequality to 128th. China is at 77. European countries are in the 30s. And so I think there's this opportunity, actually, with AI, with technology, to reindustrialize America, to go to places like Johnstown and have modern steel plants, modern factories that bring back high-paying jobs, good jobs that don't all require a college degree, that bring back industry so people in those towns understand those jobs, their parents or grandparents had them. We can be honest that the new steel plants aren't going to have blast furnaces with 4,500 people. They may have 1,000 people because some of it is going to be robotics and automation. But that's precisely what's allowing us to reindustrialize America, marrying sort of a Silicon Valley software ingenuity technology with the industrial know-how of places, and to spread the economic opportunity of these new jobs into the Black South, into Latino communities. I believe that the economic revitalization of the country, it can help bring the American dream back, also help bring some commonality to places that don't really talk to each other.
All right. I'm directionally with you. Almost everything you said right there, I'm with you on. I worry about a couple things. One is one is the implementation of it, particularly, from folks on the left. I think that you're already seeing this a little bit. I was for the CHIPS Act for a lot of the reasons you just laid out, for a lot of the things in the IRA for the reasons you just laid out. Like, we're already seeing big delays because of various permitting requirements, varying rules and restrictions, what kind of hiring they can do. I mean, I'm for DEI and the woke stuff. I'm not with with Elon and them on that, but I do think that when the government top down is putting a lot of rules and what is needed for these sorts of factories, like, that's slowing it down. That's hurting competitiveness. That's raising prices. Like, what do you say to that critique of the left? That it's like, that's a nice directionally thing to say, we should build in these communities, but like, it's hard to actually do it because of all the rules and regulations.
Look, I think we have done it historically from Hamilton to Lincoln to FDR, so it's possible. But I would say a couple of things.
The administrative state wasn't quite as big back during Hamilton's day. There was no CEQA.
And I certainly won't defend all of CEQA California, but the challenge is, I helped write the Chips and Science Act, so that's one I know well, because I worked with Schumer Young on it, and I know Intel very well, which is in my district in Gelsinger. And here was what they would tell you are the two delays there. They wouldn't say it's permitting, though I'm all for smart expediting of permitting in key areas. They would say the two things were that it took Commerce almost a year to give out the money because there were so many red tape forms of what you had to fill out, and the bureaucracy was huge, and the bureaucracy actually made it so you had to be a multinational corporation, and there were so many lawyers involved that were so scared that if they gave the money and something went wrong, that it would be the next Solyndra. So I think we need a better, more efficient way of getting the resources out to partner with the private sector. And then the second thing is the workforce. I mean, the biggest obstacle to doing this is having actually the workforce ready to be able to implement it. Some of it requires immigration as well. If we've offshored our chips industry,
now you're speaking my language.
If we've offshored the chips industry to Taiwan, and the reality is there are a lot of Taiwanese who understand that process. We need some of those folks to help in implementing the industrialization here. And of course, we probably want to think about what the relationship is with labor. An American company has a better understanding. TSMC has struggled in Arizona, partly because they had no basis, no understanding of how to work with labor. And so, of course, we do things differently here than other companies. But I think those expectations should be set right in the beginning. All that to say is, though, it's not a critique of the Biden administration, because they're trying to do something that hasn't been done in 40, 50 years. The CHIPS Act actually was an idea for Trump administration. Trump just doesn't even realize enough to take credit for it. It was this guy, Keith Crouch, in the Secretary of State, who came up with the idea. So, I think what we need to do is learn from these experiences and get better.
Yeah. What about the more free market side of this? That sure, like globalization has hollowed out certain communities, but quality of life overall has improved. Boats have been lifted. Costs, people are annoyed with inflation already. Tariffs. Limiting imports from countries with cheaper labor is going to make everything more expensive for everybody. What's your pushback on that argument?
Well, look, the quality of life has certainly improved for people in China and other parts of the world, which is not a bad thing. I mean, when you tell the story historically that it's lifted the boats of
even in America, though. Even in America, I mean, I needed this little dongle here for my new microphone, and I called up Amazon.com. It was here in about 12 hours. That's pretty nice. It cost about $4. That would not have been the case, in 1960.
Sure, and look, for someone like me, I grew up middle class. I've done well now, but the idea that you could have a phone on you, where you could watch almost any sports game, and you can watch movies. I mean, that was unthinkable. And so, for certain things, of course, prices have come down. But the trade-off has been that for the cost of the big ticket items, healthcare, childcare, education, those haven't come down. Those have gone up much faster than inflation. So consumer goods have gone down. And for a lot of people, the incomes have stagnated. And this is why, a lot of people feel the American dream has slipped away. So am I for rejecting globalization? No. Am I for rebalancing it? Yes. Why do we need massive structural trade deficits with China? Why can't we have a situation where we have some self-reliance, but we also have trade and certain things? Yes, it helps bring down the cost of goods, but other things we want to have domestic industry. So I guess I would say it was done in a way that didn't look at the severe impacts. And even Larry Summers and others have now had papers saying, we went too fast. We didn't realize what it would do to factory towns. And so if there's an overcorrection on the other side, I think that'll get us to balance, as opposed to worrying that we're going to go into some protectionist mode.
To be continued on that. What about the political side of this? There's like a what's the matter with Kansas argument that sure, the Democrats should do this. Maybe it's the right policy. Let's just grant that it's the right policy, put those disagreements aside. Say that politically, though, it's not really going to help, that rural America is against the Democrats because of culture issues, because of the media environment that they're in. There's a poll out this week that said that only 40% of voters give Biden credit for doing more on infrastructure. 37% give credit to Trump. Maybe these people just can't be reached. What do you say to that?
Well, I say it wasn't that long ago, up till 2016, that Barack Obama was carrying these places overwhelmingly. And I guess my view, and maybe it's a naive view, is any single person who has pulled the lever for Barack Hussein Obama is a gettable vote. I mean, maybe I start with that premise, and then I say, okay, like when Khanna is showing up in Johnstown, Pennsylvania, to talk about let's bring modern steel back, are they going to vote for the Democratic Party because of steel, or am I doing something else? Am I saying to them, look, I get why you're upset. I get why you don't see yourself or your kids in the future of America. I understand what brings pride to this community. I understand what you want for your future and your kids' future, and I want to work with you to build that common sense of America. So the economic can be cultural. It's about showing up. It's about understanding. It's saying, what are the things you want? I don't think it's as simplistic as saying, now, if I was just there like, look, well, let's give you more money, that probably wouldn't work. But it's about understanding the hurt of cultural pride in these communities, showing up and saying, I want to earn your vote, and I believe in you, and I believe most of the people here are good, decent people who, even though I'm an Indian American of Hindu faith, aren't going to be like Ann Coulter and say, I'll never support you, and are more reasonable.
Did you see that? It's crazy. I just saw that before we started, that she went on Vivek's podcast and said she agrees with him and everything, but wouldn't vote for him because he's an Indian. I think that she's doing this for attention, so maybe we should give it to her. But it's just like sick stuff. I'm so happy I'm free of these people. All right, you have another political reform act. I'm also halfway with you on it. We're running out of time, so we're just gonna stipulate the agreements. Ban PAC and lobbyist donations. Cool. Ban members of Congress from becoming lobbyists. Now I'm really excited. Ban members of Congress from stock trading. I don't know. I'm just okay on that one. And being with Matt Gaetz, that's a mark against you on that one. But we can talk about that one. The enact term limits for member of Congress. This is where I'm really against you. Have you seen the quality of people that the Republicans are putting up? Like, do we really need to be cycling through quicker? I think that right now we have a shortage. Just looking at this from an Adam Smith standpoint, we have a shortage of quality supply of good members of Congress. I don't know that we need to be restricting the supply. So give me the counter view to that.
So actually, the first few are the ones I'm most passionate about, and maybe that would change it. The challenge with if you don't have the banning PAC money, if you don't have campaign finance reform, you basically have these seats for almost a life if you're in the same district. The Economist did a study that the turnover rate in the U.S. Congress was less than European monarchies in terms of the transition of monarchical families in Europe. And so, you know, I ran 3 times to get into Congress. I had to run against an incumbent of my own party. All 3 times that I ran, Nancy Pelosi endorsed against me. Obama once endorsed against me, even though I worked for him. And I saw how hard it is for someone to break into politics. I was able to do it because I had a lot of fortune and breaks coming from Silicon Valley. I had access to capital and access to people, and it was still so hard. And I guess that I've seen that the system is so rigged against people who are outsiders that either you have to unrig the system and with the funding and campaigning, or we need some kind of term limits. And I'm open to whether that's 12 years, 18 years, and having a new generation of talent. The final point I'd say is you can't really look at the last 40 years of governance and be like, wow, you know, the greatest moment of American history. I mean, the American dream has declined. We've gotten into a lot of foreign policy blunders. And so I'm not so sure that having a new generation have a shot at politics isn't a good thing.
This is where my conservative impulse just contrasts with yours, Congressman. You know, you have the progressive, doe-eyed, things could get better. And I'm like, things could get worse. I look at the last 40 years and I'm like, maybe we should just stick. All right.
You're a Burke kid.
Yeah, I'm a little concerned about the potential risks ahead of us. Speaking of the potential risks of people coming in, we did have Marjorie Taylor Greene, the great congresswoman from Northwest Georgia. Really humiliate herself yesterday on the House floor. So we can laugh about that if we want, but I'm curious, what you know, you were one of the first to come out and say, no, you'll protect Mike Johnson. You will not vote to vacate. Why did you make that decision? What was different about this case than McCarthy for you? I
just thought Mike Johnson did the right thing. I mean, I know it's seems so simple, but I thought here he is under a lot of pressure, and he had the guts to put out a Ukraine bill for a vote. He separated the bills, Ukraine, Taiwan, Israel, which I thought was actually admirable because it allowed people to vote their conscience. Some of the left said, well, he's putting up an Israel bill. I said he should. That's the whole point of Congress. We can vote no. We had 37 who voted no, but you should have these things for a vote. And people said, well, what are you getting from him? I said, well, why does everything in politics have to be transactional? They said, well, he worked with Trump to overturn the election, and he has these antiquated views on gay rights. I said, look, I don't agree with him in a lot of things, but in this case, he did the right thing, and he doesn't deserve to be tossed out. And I was really happy to see the overwhelming vote.
Do you sometimes feel a burden that, like, you guys have to be the grown-ups? there aren't a lot of examples of the inverse, right? Like, there aren't a lot of examples of Mike Lawler and these other guys saying, I'm just going to do the right thing. I'm going to give Joe Biden an attaboy on this one. Where are those people? Do you talk to your Republican colleagues? Do they not just disappoint you daily and their unwillingness to kind of do the right thing in a lot of these cases? I guess Mike Johnson did on Ukraine, but outside of that, there's not a lot of.
Well, they're all hanging out at a bar with Liz Cheney, wondering what happened to the Republican Party. I mean, that's.
But there aren't closet. Some people say there are closet Liz Cheneys there. And I don't know, you talk to Republicans about as much as anybody in the Democratic caucus. Is that true? Are there folks that are, whispering to you after a beer that they wish they could speak out more?
Less and less so. When the irony is, I got elected the year Donald Trump got elected. My brother says the year anyone could get elected to anything. And I came in, and there were a lot of people then in the halls of Congress who kind of would snicker at Trump, even though he was the president of the United States, be embarrassed, crack jokes. And that's much, much, much less today. Donald Trump has a greater grip on the Republican Party today in the House than he did in 2017. And that's why it's so scary if you're going to put him, if the country puts him back into the presidency. And I think that he has a lot more people who are afraid to speak out. They've seen the fate of people like Liz Cheney or Adam Kinzinger who have spoken out. And you have far, far less dissent, even in private. I mean, people are very, very careful. Look at Mike Gallagher, who was one of the people I was actually very fond of in Congress. He comes out and he makes one decision, which is that he's not going to vote for the impeachment of Mayorkas. I don't mind saying this. I saw a Gallagher in the hallway. I said, for Mayorkas? You're giving up your career for Mayorkas? No one even, no one's heard of the Mayorkas or something. But he was principled about it, because obviously Mayorkas shouldn't be impeached. And literally...
Wait a minute, though. Mike Gallagher didn't give up his career for Mayorkas. He gave up his career because he was too wimpy to actually fight for it. He could have survived. Like, doesn't that frustrate you? Don't you look at Mike Gallagher and say, what are you doing? Like, we need people like you. Why are you throwing in the towel and going to work for Palantir? Why don't you actually just stand on your principles and run in a primary? He couldn't have survived a primary because of his Mayorkas vote? I don't believe that. I think he could have survived a primary.
I think he could have probably survived it. It would have been a very, very hard fight.
Okay.
I'm not.
Life is hard. You're in Congress. You're a public servant. Like, come on.
Yeah, no. Okay, look, I think I wish he would have fought. I would have supported him. I don't know if it would have mattered in a primary. I would have supported him. I think he was a thoughtful Republican. But yeah, look, you need more people on that side willing to stand up. And certainly, God forbid, if Trump gets elected, you're going to need that. And I don't see it. I don't see it. And the question is, because politics, I mean, I'm a student of, like, you probably have history, and you look at Lincoln, and one of the geniuses of Lincoln was that he always knew where to push, but where to understand the party and how to navigate that. And I'm not comparing like Gallagher to Lincoln, but I thought there are people like Gallagher who were operating within the system. They weren't Cheney, they weren't Kissinger. They were doing sort of what they needed to do. And then you would think, okay, they're going to strike to move in the right direction. And that's the question. I mean, are there those people? And they're becoming fewer and fewer.
Yeah, I'm in the middle of watching some Lincoln stuff right now, and they definitely are not Lincoln. I do agree with you on that. But yeah, the push and pull, it's interesting. It's an interesting time to look at because there are some parallels. Okay, we're over time. I was supposed to get into medical debt. But I'm not really sure my opinion on it yet. You have a new proposal out to cancel medical debt. My old instincts are blanching at that, but I want to actually think about it before I offer an opinion. So people can read your, you've put out some material on that. People can read that. We can maybe come back and have a longer discussion on that, some of the other issues. And maybe, I guess my final question is, might you come back because you're thinking about running for a different office? Are you thinking about running for anything else? Or are you happy in the House of Representatives?
Well, it depends if we have future elections, right?
How worried are you about that? Is that a joke to you, or is that seriously? Like, how worried were you about that? Because I think,
well,
go ahead.
Look, I'm a hugely hopeful about the American story. You can't not be. If you're a son of Indian immigrants, you have a grandfather who spent years in jail with Gandhi. Parents immigrate here, born in Philadelphia, at the age of 40, get to elected to represent Silicon Valley, arguably the most wealthy, innovative place in the world. Obviously, you believe in America. And I think we're an incredible country that's overcome 250 years of slavery, that overcame tyranny, that overcame the Civil War, that overcame civil rights. So do I think that a clownish billionaire entertainer is going to end American democracy? No. And one of the things I talk about leadership is some of the Democratic Party, let's have a more confidence. I mean, if you're in a plane and there's turbulence, do you want your pilot saying, gosh, we're going to crash, we're going to crash, we're going to crash? Or do you want your pilot saying, we're going to get to the other side and it's going to be a stronger democracy? So I think we're going to prevail, but I think that Donald Trump is going to do tremendous damage if he wins to the country in 4 years, and he's going to erode voting rights and make it harder to emerge as a multiracial democracy.
That's a good place to end. Thank you, Congressman Ro Khanna. We 100% agree on that. This is great. Come back soon. We can chop it up a little bit more. I really appreciate it, having some thoughtful folks in Congress. I don't want you term limited out. I want you to stay, okay? Because I don't know what's coming after you. I think it's probably worse. But thanks so much. We'll come back, and we'll see you on the Bulwark Podcast sometime soon.
Enjoyed it. Appreciate it. Thanks.
All right. We'll be back tomorrow with a Friday weekend edition of the Bulwark Podcast. See you all then. Peace.